Here.
So you got Ash Carter, who says they don't have the will to fight. Then you have Vice President Biden says, no, 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 no. They absolutely have the will to fight. They're great fighters. Then you have Josh Earnest say, well, look, we have seen a pattern of them not being the most willful fighters. What is the line out of the White House? What do you want to say about it?
Chris, first of all, it's more complicated than a line. We have a terrorist organization that intends to do harm to the Iraqi forces, intends to do harm to the region, and even more broadly than that. And what our focus is on, Chris, is equipping, training, preparing the Iraqi security forces to take on this fight. They've taken on this fight, they're continuing to, but we need to adapt our strategy too and adapt to the type of equipment we're providing as well as time goes on and as ISIL adapts.
Is this just a function of the reality that the best fighters in the world are not in the fight, the U.S. fighting men and women, and that the reality is that when you're dealing with the Iraqis, yes, they should be in charge of their own determination and fight their own fights, but they're not up to the task the way U.S. fighters would be. Do you think that's what kind of gave birth to this will to fight drama?
Well, Chris, I certainly would not put it in those terms. Let me first say that what Secretary Carter said is consistent with what he was seeing and hearing from the ground, but also the Iraqis themselves had acknowledged that there were some command issues, there were some issues on the ground, and it's something they want to adapt to as well. As you know from the Vice President's readout of his call, we've rushed 2,000 A-24s there. We want to equip them with the materials they need to take on some of the tactics that ISIL has been using, as they did overnight in the suicide attacks. But this is a case where the training began late last year. It wasn't applicable, or wasn't the Iraqi security forces who were fighting back in Ramadi didn't have access to that. That's something we need to continue. But they've also, I think it's important for people to remember, the Iraqi security forces have also retaken 25% of populated areas from ISIL. There are going to be ups and downs here. We need to continue to adapt, and we need to continue to prepare them and equip them with what they need, as does the international coalition.
Bottom line, the White House believes that the Iraqis have the will to fight, yes?
Well, I think we've seen some issues in the past. We need to address those. I would remind you also, and I think we talked about this a year ago, that Prime Minister Abadi came in a situation where there was a lot of division, a lot of work needed to be done to better unite the forces, to better bring them together, to equip them. He's done that work. His security forces have done that work. It takes some time, and we're going to stay at it, Chris.
All right, so while you're working toward a yes on that question, you got to also be concerned about what Iran is doing here. They come out, one of their military leaders, and say, don't talk about the Iraqi will to fight. Talk about your own will to fight. And literally, to paraphrase, they say President Obama hasn't done a damn thing to confront ISIS. Are you concerned in the White House about how Iran is working their way in to Iraq and becoming in favor there?
Well, Chris, if we spent every day worrying about what Iranians said about the United States, that's all we would focus on. The fact is, the proof's in the pudding. We've done thousands of airstrikes along with our coalition forces. We've trained, we've equipped the Iraqi security forces, and we have taken steps to support them and their needs on the ground. And we're going to stay at that. But the actions speak louder than words there. So we're not going to worry about the Iranian accusations. We're going to focus on what more we need to do to help support the Iraqi security forces on the ground.
When you say more we need to do, is there any chance that you wind up putting more U.S. fighting men and women on the ground?
I think the president's been very clear about that, Chris. Of course, as commander-in-chief, he's constantly talking to his military advisors. We're talking to our coalition partners. As I noted earlier, we just rushed 2,000 A-24s to the ground. So, of course, we're constantly making decisions and taking steps to make sure we're adapting to the tactics that ISIL and others are using on the ground.
Jen Psaki.